Hello everyone, I'm Scantier, and welcome to the Channeling Magic video in my Guild Wars 1 skill review project. It's a Ritualist attribute line, and we're going to go ahead and jump in just a moment, but first I just wanted to mention that Channeling Magic in the Ritualist attribute lines tends to be sort of the more offensive magic. So if you were to roughly categorize them, again, communing would be about summoning spirits, restoration would be about healing and protection, those sorts of things. Channeling is about offensive spells, and spawning power is about making your stuff a little bit better and having some more unique effects to kind of facilitate things to make ritualists especially good at what they do, that sort of stuff. Unfortunately, this is not entirely accurate because of a skill we'll get to right here, Signet of Spirits. We'll get to this later, but this is an extraordinarily powerful spirit summoning skill. And like I said, we'll talk about that later. But what that basically means is that channeling magic also tends to be kind of the king of spirits, not just offensive magic. So keep that in mind. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump in now with Agni. So Agni is 10 energy, 3/4 second activation time, 30-second recharge. It is a binding ritual. So keep in mind, rituals are not spells, they are rituals. That might be an important distinction for, say, Mesmer interrupts. Anyway, what Agni does is it creates a level 10 spirit, and this spirit causes 9 health loss each second to foes within earshot, but it loses 9 health for each foe hurt in this way. It dies after 78 seconds. In all practical terms, that 78-second duration is probably never going to be met. It technically exists, but this thing will kill itself very quickly. You really want good spawning power in order to make this spirit last. It is in sort of the passive category of spirit, but it will drain its health very, very quickly if there's any number of enemies in the area. It does do reasonable damage, not quickly per se, but this is 9 health loss each second is equivalent to 4.5 pips of health degeneration, and that adds up, but it also stacks on top of health degen. It's outside of the health regen and degeneration caps. So that makes this particular ritual do decent damage. Keep in mind, it basically is going to deal damage equal to its HP. At level 10, things would have 100 plus 9 times 20. That's 180, so that's about 280 HP. Spawning power will increase that by 4% per point in spawning power. So with, say, 12 spawning power, that would be roughly 50% more. So that would get you, what was that, 280. And 50% more of that would be another 140. So that's going to be roughly 400 damage, something like that. This can deal decent amount of damage to things, but keep in mind it's spread out across... That's evenly split among the enemies in the area. So, this does okay. But if the main reason to bring this, in my opinion, would be if you just want another spirit to be there or something like that, because the damage is okay. I'm gonna give this a 3. I made my little data entry boxes bigger, which is very nice. Anyway, so Agni is... I'm going to give it a 3. I feel like this is okay. It does okay damage to things. But if I'm just wanting a spirit to bring along, I'm going to want something like Bloodsong. So Agni is not typically my choice. Again, part of the reason is because usually I'm going to want some sort of passive spirit to be around. So that way things like Spirit Light, for example, which is a healing spell... That means I don't have to sacrifice health if there's any spirits in earshot. We'll talk about it more in Restoration Magic, but I like to bring this on my traditional, typical Ritualist build, and this requires a spirit to be present. Agni tends to actually kill itself very quickly, so it's not really a good spirit to have as kind of a spirit that's just around. So I don't tend to favor it, in part because of that. That brings us to... Ancestor's Rage. So Ancestor's Rage is 5 energy. It is a 1/4 second activation time, 10-second recharge. It is a skill, not a spell. And for 1 second, nothing happens. When this skill ends, so after that 1 second elapses, all foes adjacent to your targeted ally take 89 lightning damage. So this is armor respecting. That means it does drop off in higher level areas where enemies tend to have egregious levels of armor and stuff like that. This is okay. Again, you do need to make sure you're targeting a specific ally. If you're not targeting an ally, it will target yourself, which maybe you want. Maybe you're doing some sort of spirit weapon or spirit strength build where you're going up. We'll talk about that in spawning power, but that's a skill that gives you more damage if you have a weapon skill on you. So in that case, you might be doing some sort of build where you're running up in front to an enemy, and Ancestor's Rage can be a point-blank area effect. But it's a useful skill if you have melee attackers in lower level areas or like standard areas that don't have the crazy armor on enemies. But I don't tend to use this one very often. Like, usually when I bring a Ritualist, it's a very specific build, and this is not part of it. So I'm going to give this a 3, because I think that this is a fine skill, but it's just not one that I typically use. So that's just kind of, unfortunately, its major issue. That brings us to Blood Song. So Blood Song is 5 energy, 3/4 second activation time, 30-second recharge. It is a binding ritual. Create a level 10 spirit who dies after 126 seconds. Attacks by that spirit steal up to 21 health. So the way Blood Song works is it's an auto-attacking spirit similar to Pain, actually, in many regards. But Blood Song, instead of straight up dealing damage, it's 21 lifesteal. So that means it heals itself with its attacks. This gives it a little bit more durability. It's also only 5 energy, and 30 seconds is a pretty standard recharge for binding rituals. So this is my preferred spirit if I just want a generic spirit around in channeling magic, which there's a couple of different arguments for wanting one around. So for example, Essence Strike wants a spirit around to gain you energy. Gaze from Beyond wants a spirit around for additional effects. Lamentation, same sort of way. If a spirit is around, it has additional effects. There's a bunch of these skills that have effects like Spirit Burn if any spirit are within earshot. So Spirit Siphon is an energy management skill that needs spirits around. So there's a couple of different spells in here that just want spirits in earshot or in your area or whatever. And Bloodsong is a nice option for that. It does not require you to go to a different attribute line to be able to get access to a spirit. It sticks around for a long time. All these sorts of things. It does additional damage. It's very convenient from that standpoint. So it tends to end up on the standard bar that I bring alongside Signet of Spirits. So I quite like this one. I'm gonna give it a 4. I don't think it's quite good enough for a 5, but I do typically bring it with me, and I'm quite fond of this one, just because it's a little bit of additional pressure. It's a little bit more durable than your average attacking spirit, and it's in an attribute line that really wants to be making spirits, so it's very convenient in that regard. Okay, that brings us to Caretaker's Charge. This is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 4 second recharge, elite spell. Target foe is struck for 64 lightning damage. If you are holding an item, you gain 5 energy and 41 health. So what's nice about this is it's free. And heals you is a nice side effect. But if you only bring this if you are bringing an item spell to hold an item in order to get the additional effects from this. It's not worth it if it's not free in healing you. So this is unfortunately going to start the trend of Ritualist elite spells that are kind of okay, but genuinely are not great. Keep in mind, this is dealing flare levels of damage, but it's single target. So free flare is still not a great spell, unfortunately, and having a recharge damages it in that regard. I look at this and I'm like, this is just kind of weak. So the biggest problem that this has, honestly, is that Signet of Spirits and Destructive was Glaive exist in this attribute line, and Caretaker's Charge is trying to compete with very powerful elites. I wouldn't often bring this even if it wasn't an elite, and the fact that it is, I think, is going to bump it down to a 2 for me. the requiring an item to function is a very low bar. Um, it is a bar, but it's a low bar. The fact of the matter is, like, even free, this just doesn't deal enough damage to really be warranted most of the time. And so I'm going to want to prefer a different elite. I'm going to want to prefer something like Clamor of Souls, and more often I'm going to want Signet of Spirits or Destructive was Glaive if I'm going to be doing something like that. So unfortunately, Caretaker's Charge is just too little damage to really interest me most of the time. Even though it is free and heals me. Like, incidental healing like that is not bad. It certainly is beneficial. It's like Magic the Gathering, right? Where things that have incidental healing aren't necessarily bad, but it's like that's not the main focus. So like this ain't exactly Kitchen Finks level either. This is like your 2/1s that gain you 4 life. Like there's certain situations where that's useful, but anyway, moving along. We have Channeled Strike. Channeled Strike is 10 energy, 2-second cast time, 4-second recharge spell. Target foe is struck for 77 lightning damage. That foe is struck for an additional 29 lightning damage if you're holding an item. To me, this is a bit too expensive and slow to cast for most builds. It works really well if you're doing something with Cruel was Daoshin or Destructive was Glaive, which are item spells that give you armor penetration on your Ritualist skills. This certainly benefits from those. However, it is still kind of slow and expensive. The recharge is good. But keep in mind, you don't have access to your item or your weapon while you're holding an item, which does lower your decreases your maximum energy to whatever your natural is. I didn't talk about it with the Ritualist armor, but this is standard spellcasting stuff of plus 10 energy at the base level. And like if I switch to this, you can see I have 30 energy and 4 pips of energy regen. These are Zealous daggers, so they remove a pip of energy regen there. So Channeled Strike, I like it reasonably well in some builds, but this is not a skill that I'd typically bring with me. I'm going to give this a 2. I do like it okay in skills or in builds with like Destructive was Glaive, with Destructive was Glaive, I should say. But you do need to have an item skill, and it's not something I would just slot onto a bar. So, a kind of a build around me level. That's why it's getting that tier. But I do like it in those sorts of builds. Okay, Clamor of Souls. 10 energy, 1-second cast time, 8-second recharge, elite spell. Target foe and all nearby foes take 54 lightning damage. If you are within earshot of a spirit or holding a bundle item, so that would be an item spell creates a bundle item for you to hold. But it could also be carrying some sort of thing out in the world. It happens on occasion, like if you're carrying a gear in Sorrow's Furnace or the offering in Divinity Coast mission. Those count 2, I believe. Anyway, if you are within earshot of a spirit or holding a bundle item, you gain 10 energy, so you're refunded the cost of the spell. This is one of those skills that, like, hey, it's free, but it's also only 54 lightning damage. Like, unfortunately, a lot of the Ritualist spells, a lot of the Ritualist elites, I should say, that deal lightning damage just are very mediocre damage. Like, 54 damage, yes, it's a pretty good-sized area of effect, but every 8 seconds is just way too slow. So I've actually found this to be startlingly disappointing. I would much... Like, if I'm trying to get area of effect damage, I'm going to want to go with, like, Rodgort's Invocation on an Elementalist or something like that. That's not what I'm going to bring a Ritualist for. And so we always have to keep in mind, like, why are we doing this? What, like, when you're making a team build, what role are you trying to fulfill? And Ritualist, Clamor of Souls is not really... Like, here's the other thing, too. Spirit Rift is much higher area of effect damage. It's a smaller area of effect, but this is 105 damage on a lower recharge with a longer cast time, but the benefit of also inflicting cracked armor. So additional hits will be harder. Like, there's a lot of caveats with Spirit Rift here. It's a very finicky spell, but it hits significantly harder than Clamor of Souls does by, like, almost twice as much damage more frequently, albeit at the same sort of high energy cost without the refund. But Clamor of Souls is just very, very unimpressive. I'm going to give it a 2 as well. I don't think it's quite as useless as a 1, but it's just what you need from your elite is for it to do stuff, and this is just a little too weak for that. So, Cruel was Daoshin, is 15 energy, 2-second cast time, 30-second recharge, item spell. Hold Daoshin's ashes for up to 51 seconds. While you hold his ashes, all ritualist skills have 10% armor penetration. When you drop his ashes, all nearby foes are struck for 71 lightning damage. So, there's an elite version of this, Destructive's Glaive. We'll talk about it in just a couple skills. This is an alright effect. Again, this is not typically what I'm trying to do with the Ritualist. And what this is doing is it is making things like Channeled Strike, technically Clamor of Souls, Caretaker's Charge. It makes them able to hit a bit harder. That's typically not the direction I'm going with a Ritualist. And honestly, if I'm bringing a Ritualist for damage, it's more going to be spirits that don't care about armor than it is their pseudo-elementalist-like line of lightning spells. So I'm not honestly a big fan of this, just from the standpoint of that's not what I'm doing with a Ritualist. So I'm gonna give this a 2 as well. I think it's something you can try to build around, but I'm not entirely convinced about that particular thing anyway. But again, you have to specifically be building with ritual skills that care about armor, that you want to get the armor penetration on. So, this is a 2 of like, this is for a specific build, not a specific, like a general skill that you just toss around. Destruction. Destruction is 10 energy, 3/4 second cast time, 20-second recharge, which is pretty low for a binding ritual anyway. This creates a level 11 spirit that dies after 30 seconds. When this spirit dies, all foes in the area take 21 damage for each second the spirit was alive, maximum of 150 damage. So, a couple of things to keep in mind. This is armor ignoring damage because it is untyped. It will automatically die after 30 seconds. If enemies attack it and kill it, it will die then. And the damage caps out at 150. So, at 21 damage, it's actually going to get to that cap relatively quickly. Yeah, it's going to take it about 8 seconds to reach the cap, I guess. So you can just activate this on recharge. It also plays well with some of the spawning power skills, I want to say, that destroy spirits for effects. Actually, the fact that it caps out on damage so quickly is something I hadn't realized. This is an okay spirit to use if you just want a spirit around, but I like Bloodsong better for that. Where do I want to kind of put this? The other issue, to be clear, that this one has is the fact that it takes 30 seconds for it to naturally die. If something's not killing it off, you're probably killing the group of enemies within 30 seconds. Battles in this game tend to go fairly quickly. So, like, you might... A standard battle is probably going to be no more than a minute, is my guess. So you're probably not getting that many pulses off of destruction. So I'm liking this better now that I'm realizing how quickly it hits its cap. If it didn't cap like that, after 30 seconds, it would deal... Goodness, at 21 damage, that's... what, 600 damage or something like that? That'd certainly be a lot more impressive. Which is why it caps like that. So I'm going to give this guy a 3. I feel like it's another one of those, like, this is an okay effect. Agni is certainly more immediate, and I probably prefer Agni over Destruction a little bit, but I can see Destruction playing really well with, like I said, some of those destroy spirit skills. So definitely one that I had sort of passed over and not really considered, because I didn't realize how quickly it hit its cap. I thought it basically you had to wait for 30 seconds. It's like, no, it hits its cap pretty quickly, so if you can get it down quickly, it actually does okay. Destructive was Glaive. So this is 5 energy, 3/4 second cast time, 5-second recharge. The 3/4 second cast time is really nice on an item spell. This is an elite item spell. Hold Glaive's Ashes for up to 54 seconds. While you hold her ashes, all Ritualist skills have 20% armor penetration, and when you drop her ashes, all foes in the area are struck for 71 lightning damage. This to me is another one of those like 2s. I think it's extremely powerful in the right build, but I don't tend to run that build very often. Apparently it's useful in Domain of Agni, I was learning recently. But this can be a really powerful part of those sorts of builds that do care about dealing damage with ritual skills, with skills that care about armor. Again, there's a bunch of the skills that I tend to prefer are armor ignoring, but rituals do have a bunch of spells that do. So like the standard sort of build that I would do with this would be like a Channeled Strike, Spirit Rift, maybe Spirit Burn, stuff like that, Renewing Strike. And those things are going to be okay. The sort of build that I was seeing is one that uses Arcane Echo to duplicate this one and kind of spam them back and forth to get the 71 damage with like 20% armor penetration happening very quickly. Something like that I can definitely see being fairly powerful. But this is definitely useful for the area of effect, and that should be said. This is very useful for the area of effect. But I do feel like if you're using this, you're making a very specific build and you're being very kind of intentional with it, so it's not one that I just casually bring, if that makes sense. Essence Strike. Essence Strike is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 8 second recharge. Spell. Target foe struck for 51 lightning damage. If any spirits are within earshot, you gain 7 energy. So I tend to like this one just because the energy gain is very useful. The damage is nice, kind of like incidental damage, but I tend to bring this because it's net 2 energy every 8 seconds, which is nice to have. Again, you do have to have a spirit with you, but that tends to be fairly easy. For me, this is a 4. Just, again, this is not because of power per se, but just because this is a skill that I tend to bring a lot. And to some extent, just as a reminder, these are ratings that I'm using to review skills that I might have overlooked, but also to set up stuff for a program, so that way I can be like, hey, give me a bunch of skills that I don't tend to use as much. So there's a little bit of biasing there. But yeah, this is a fine, like, sort of... It's a nice reward skill for doing the thing of making spirits, and I kind of like the simple sort of, it does this thing, you bring it for some energy, sort of spot that it fits in. Gaze from Beyond. 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 10 second recharge. Spell. Target foe struck for 56 lightning damage. If you are within earshot of a spirit, that foe is blinded for 5 seconds. I definitely would not bring this if I was not getting the blind. Again, this is another reward for doing the thing of making spirits. Fairly easy to do. The effect is certainly nice of having blind, but if I'm going for blind, I'm tending to go with like a Blinding Surge Elementalist. That tends to be the general way that I'm going about getting blind on my team. That said, this is a nice non-elite way of potentially adding a little bit of blind. That seems like it's probably pretty reasonable. I'm going to give this a 3. I like the spot that it's sitting in, so... but you do need the blind from it to really make this worthwhile. So... Gaze of Fury. 10 energy, 3/4 second activation time, 20 second recharge, binding ritual. Destroy target spirit and create a level 11 spirit of Fury. This spirit's attacks deal 17 damage, and it dies after 54 seconds. So this can target your own spirits, but this is more useful for destroying enemy spirits. This to me is a 2. I think this is a really nice spirit counter, but not a skill that I would bring unless I'm specifically wanting to destroy enemy spirits. So generally this would be something that I might consider using if I'm going up against, say, the Jade Sea or some of the Afflicted. Have ritualists that make a lot of spirits. This could be really useful there. I can especially see wanting to bring this for Soothing, which is a spirit we'll talk about later that makes adrenaline gain take longer. If you have a lot of adrenaline usage, having the ability to just destroy that spirit is useful. Or taking out like recuperation or restoration. There's a couple of spirits that's nice to be able to blow up with this. The main reason to use this is because it just takes out that spirit like instantly, right? And it adds some additional damage, which is nice, but because it's going to be in the enemy backline, it's probably going to get destroyed pretty quickly. But I like this as a sort of counterplay to powerful spirits that the enemy might be using. Like, this sort of skill existing is really good from a counter strategy standpoint, in that the ability to have counter strategies or hate cards, I guess, is the phrase that I'd use from like Magic, but basically effects or skills that specifically counter specific things, like this does, is really good. So this might be really useful if like Wanderlust is being used, for example, which is an obnoxious spirit that we'll talk about when we get to communing prayers that can knock down. I wouldn't tend to use this if there's just going to be like pain or something like that, but if there's going to be like Spirit of Disenchantment or Displacement, less that, but like Spirit of Disenchantment or what's the blinding one? Shadow Song. There's some really useful spirits to be able to destroy instantly with this, and so I certainly like it from that standpoint, and I like the design space that it's playing in of, hey, what's an interesting way that we can make a skill to specifically counteract spirits? And this is a really good one, so I like that from a design standpoint. Grasping was Kurong. So this is 15 energy, 1 second cast time, 20 second recharge, elite item spell. Hold Kurong's ashes for up to 51 seconds. When you drop his ashes, all nearby foes are struck for 63 damage and knocked down. So the damage is nice, the knockdown is cool. This makes me think of comboing it with Aftershock, an Elementalist's Earth magic spell that deals more damage to knocked down foes. This is very disruptive. All nearby foes is actually quite large effect range. So this is an interesting skill. I'm going to give this a 3. It's not one that I typically use, and it's going to be a little, like, you have to be, it's point blank area of effect, so you have to be up in the enemy's face to make use of this, but a large area of effect knockdown like this is certainly intriguing, and gets me thinking a bit, okay, how would I potentially use this? What sort of situation would I want to do with this? What sort of build might I make? But just the effect itself is kind of strong. So I could see just like, I don't know, a Grasping was Kurong warrior that like casts this, runs into a group of enemies and drops it, and then starts attacking and things like that. Like, there's a lot of disruptive options with this. And the fact that you don't really care about the duration because you're going to be dropping it pretty quickly, and the damage is less important than the knockdown, means that I can see using this with relatively low attribute investment. So it certainly is a really interesting skill, and I feel like you could make a lot of fun, quirky builds with it. So I quite like the space that it is playing in. Lamentation. This is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 15 second recharge, hex spell. For 17 seconds, target foe and all nearby foes suffer -2 health degeneration. When this hex is applied, it says these foes, but the foes that are being affected by it, take 42 damage if you are within earshot of a spirit or a corpse. So this is kind of like the Necromancer hex Suffering or Lingering Curse, in that it, like, once you get up to 13 channeling magic, here I'll show you. This now is -3 health degen, so you really want to be in that area with it. And it stacks nicely with them. It's the same sort of larger area of effect with the nearby range. And its benefit is it does some armor ignoring damage when you apply it. So 42 damage if you're within earshot of a spirit or corpse. That's very, very easy to do. Earshot is, or a spirit tends to be something that you're going to be using as a ritualist anyway. And being within earshot of a corpse can be easy to do once things start dying. So this is a nice little pressure skill that also has some nice front-loaded armor ignoring damage. I don't usually bring this just because the bar that I typically use is very full, but I can see using Lamentation on some sort of pressure build or things like that. I'm going to give this a 3 because I do think this is a solid skill and pretty easy to use for a ritualist. You definitely want the 13 channeling magic in order to be able to get the -3 health degen. but the fact that this has a bunch of armor ignoring damage off the top in a pretty good area of effect is really nice. So definitely a skill that I have liked and think is fairly reasonable. Okay, that brings us to Nightmare Weapon. So, is this our first weapon spell that we've talked about? I think it might be. So this is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 10-second recharge, weapon spell. For 12 seconds, target ally has a Nightmare Weapon, and that ally's next 3 attacks are reduced by 42 damage and steal up to 42 health. So a lot of the time what this basically says is their next 3 attacks steal 42 health instead of dealing normal damage, because it's real hard to get over 42 damage with it, although possible. Nightmare Weapon is... So, first of all, I don't tend to bring multiple weapon spells, because you can only have 1 weapon spell on you at a time. And Splinter Weapon, we'll get to later, tends to be my preferred choice. But Nightmare Weapon, I actually quite like in areas where there aren't as many group ups of enemies, or if I'm wanting some additional healing, like... I prefer it if I'm bringing this sort of my standard Signet of Spirits sort of build against, say, Shido in the Imperial Sanctum mission. I'm going to like Nightmare Weapon there over Splinter Weapon because it's a single target, right? The nice thing about this also is it is technically a healing skill. Because they steal up to 42 health, they're able to, over their next 3 attacks, this is going to steal 126 HP. And so that's actually a pretty decent heal off of 5 energy. So I don't bring this all the time, but I do like this sometimes. Enough that I'm going to give it a 4. The other thing that's really significant about this is it means that those hits will probably deal more damage as well, because like a lot of weapon attacks are just not going to hit 42 damage, so this is going to boost their damage up to 42. So it gets a little bit of additional damage in, and it heals the ally, which are both really nice things. It's just, it tends to get beaten out by Splinter Weapon a lot of the time, and like I said, I don't tend to bring multiple weapon spells. So, I like what this is doing too as design, as this is an interesting way of doing kind of like an alternate healing type skill. So that's kind of cool as well. But like I said, I tend to not bring this just because of Splinter Weapon, but this is... Basically, if I'm not bringing Splinter Weapon, this is usually the alternate weapon spell that I am bringing. And there are certain circumstances where I do consider doing that, which is the main reason why I'm giving it a score as high as I am. Offering of Spirit. This is 17% health sacrifice, 5 energy, quarter second cast time, and 15-second recharge. It is an elite spell. Gain 15 energy. If any spirits are within earshot, you do not sacrifice health. So, this directly compares to Offering of Blood, which I don't have Offering of Blood on this character to demonstrate with, but I can quickly add, was it Master of Whispers, I think? And we can jump over to him. So, Offering of Blood right here, as you can see, this has a higher life sacrifice, but he's also at 12 blood magic right now. And what you can see is the cast time and recharge are the same. They are both 15 quarter second cast time and 15-second recharge. This costs 5 energy and gives me 15. This costs 1 energy and gives me 18. So while this, yes, always costs me health, it gains me 17 energy at 12 attribute points, while Offering of Spirit gains me only 10. In general, I'm not going to be... So if I'm primary ritualist, Offering of Spirit's probably not my go-to energy management skill. I'm probably going to be bringing, honestly, Essence Strike tends to be the skill that I use, or Spirit Siphon. Those tend to be the energy management skills that I'm going to be bringing as a primary ritualist, and they work just fine as a secondary as well. If I'm specifically going into a secondary, and I'm not going to be doing something like, say, Spirit Siphon, because there's other options I should add in spawning power. There are other options for energy management as well that I tend to like better. For example, soul twisting, spirit channeling. I don't use spirit channeling, but soul twisting is another option Reclaim Essence is another option. And Energetic was Lisa is technically an option for energy management, although not one I tend to use. There's another... I know it is. Boon of Creation is another energy management skill that ritualists have. That all of those in Spawning Power are options that I would consider over Offering of Spirit. So the big problem that Offering of Spirit has is, as a primary ritualist, I have better options, many of which are non-elite. And if I'm going secondary, if I'm going to go ritualist for energy management, it's because I want something like Spirit Siphon that doesn't take my elite slot. Otherwise, I'm going Offering of Blood, because Offering of Blood nets me more energy with lower attribute investment. Like, so if I go down to 10 blood magic, you can see I'm gaining 15 energy off of this. I have to go really low. Right here, at 4 blood magic, right? Does 3 also do it? No. Okay, so at 4 blood magic, Offering of Blood gains me 10 energy, the same. But it doesn't require 12 attribute points at that point. It's much, much cheaper. And the thing is, I'm probably going to put, decent attribute points into it, but I can go 10 attribute and get more energy out of it. So, generally speaking, if I'm going to be in a situation where there aren't any spirits around, in which case I can't use Spirit Siphon, I'm going to want Offering of Blood if I'm going to be using one of these two skills as a secondary, because it's more efficient. It only costs me 3% more health than Offering of Spirit does, but it gains me so much more relative energy. So, honestly, like, the problem this spell has is it's trying to compete with Offering of Blood, and it's losing badly on its raw stats. And the only situation where it performs better, as in not having a health sacrifice, is a situation in which I can use another skill that I prefer. So, to me, this is a 1. Like, I don't know if a situation when I'd ever use this. It takes up my elite slot, and I've just gone over a whole litany of why I don't ever use this skill and why I wouldn't ever consider using this skill. Like, keep in mind that this 1 is because there are better options available that easily outclass it. It's not, like, so trash tier of a 1 that it's withdraw hexes territory. Just, that's a 0. But anyway, it's just that there's never a time when I would consider using this unless I'm doing some sort of special thing that means that I don't have options. Anyway, that's enough random rambling on that one. Let's go ahead and move on to Painful Bond. So this is 15 energy, 1 second cast time, 12 second recharge. It is a hex spell. For 18 seconds, target foe and all nearby foes are hexed with Painful Bond, and they take 18 damage whenever hit by a spirit's attack. So that means the 18 is armor ignoring, and it basically means that it doubles the damage that your spirits deal to that group of enemies, which can be quite impactful. This makes your spirits deal a lot more damage. It's extraordinarily powerful. So Painful Bond actually is a spell that I am quite fond of. I'm going to rate this one a 5 because I bring this one all the time in the sort of build that I want to make. 5 is maybe a little high. It's kind of like a 4.5, but I'm going to leave it at a 5 just because the amount of damage increase that it does, like, when I don't bring this on the Signet of Spirits, which is the most common build for me to run a Ritualist on, it's usually what I do. When I don't bring this, it's probably a mistake. So the amount of damage you get out of this is just very, very high. So I am extremely fond of this. It is a good way of kind of doing this too, because it does mean that you have to, like, keep applying it to groups of enemies and things like that, and those sorts of things. And I appreciate that this sort of skill exists to ramp up spirit damage. The other thing that's really important to recognize that's easy to overlook is that this skill is in Channeling Magic, and most of the offensive spirits are in Communing. So this actually means that you would have to go between 2 attributes to be able to get this very powerful effect. That's really good design. The problem is Signet of Spirits, and we're going to get into that in just a couple of skills. But the problem of Signet of Spirits is in Channeling Magic, and it shouldn't be. Communing is where most of your spirit summoning is. That's where Signal of Spirits effect belongs. But Painful Bond is an incredibly powerful effect, and made all the more so by the fact that Signal of Spirits exists. But even if I was only going into communing to get my offensive spirits, Painful Bond would certainly be worth considering. It'd probably be knocked down to a 4 without Signal of Spirits existing, though. Renewing, or if Signal of Spirits was in communing, and I wasn't as inclined to go into channeling, although there's still other strong arguments for going into channeling. Anyway, Renewing Surge is our next skill. It is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 15 second recharge, hex spell. For 8 seconds, target foe suffers 10 damage each second, armor ignoring again. When this hex ends, you gain 7 energy. So what's really interesting about this one is this damage is outside of the health degen system. So anytime you see something like this is going to deal 80 damage, right? And then refund you some energy, but it's going to refund you some energy a little bit later, which is sometimes better than refunding the energy right away. So this is you slap this on enemy and then use a couple more expensive skills, and then you get your energy back, and that's really cool. The fact that this goes outside of the degen system makes it a little bit more appealing, just because the degen caps mean you only want so much health degeneration kind of in your party, because at a certain point you're losing effectiveness. I'm going to give this one a 3. It does nice stuff. It does decent damage. It gives you energy back, which are both really nice things. The fact that single target is unfortunate, but I mean, this would be crazy if it was adjacent or something like that, because then you could get energy from a group of enemies when this all ended. It would be Arcane Conundrum all over again, except arguably better. So this is, in fact, a very reasonable spell, but I don't tend to bring it over Essence Strike. Essence Strike just has a higher rate of return because of the lower recharge. They both will return me 7 energy. Essence Strike does considerably less damage than Renewing Surge does, both because Renewing Surge will deal, in aggregate, 80 damage at these points, whereas Essence Strike is rated for 51, but Essence Strike also respects armor, which means usually it's going to deal less damage than the 51 it's rated for, whereas Renewing Surge will always deal its rated damage, provided there aren't things reducing the damage it's taking. That's one thing I should point out, by the way, is that while this damage gets around the degen cap, it is affected by things like Shielding Hands or Shield of Absorption or other effects that reduce damage, whereas Health Degen is not. But I like this sort of design space for ritual stuff, and I wish more ritual skills were kind of playing in this area, if that makes sense. In sort of the quirky sort of side area like this, but they're not. Anyway, that brings us to Signet of Spirits. So Signet of Spirits is a 1 second activation time, 30 second recharge, elite signet. Create 3 level 10 spirits. These spirits deal 17 damage with attacks and die after 60 seconds. This skill is broken. It is so bustedly good. This is another one of those skills that's rated like a 10. There are times where I kid you not, literally gone out to grab Signet of Spirits on a secondary ritualist just to get through some area, some solo area, just because Signet of Spirits is so friggin' powerful. This is part of what incentivizes me to bring a ritualist, is Signet of Spirits is just an incredibly effective skill. It creates 3 spirits, which is really good for skills that scale with spirits, like Men, Body, and Soul, that we'll get to in Restoration Magic. I usually bring this along with Bloodsong. It's part of my standard build. It deals, it adds a bunch of additional damage. It stacks with Painful Bond really nicely, and it should not be in Channeling Magic. The reason why it's in Channeling Magic is the PvP version of this skill, the original effect of this skill, was 1 second activation time, 20 second recharge, gain 10 energy if a spirit's in earshot. So if you're near a spirit or whatever, if there's a spirit around you, you'd gain energy. That particular iteration works super well with Quickening Zephyr, which is a spirit that you can be near to gain energy, and that's actually something that I have done in PvP in a guild versus guild before, where it's oh, this is a Quickening Zephyr build. I'm a monk. I need energy. How about Signet of Spirits? They changed this effect, in my opinion, somewhat unfortunately, because I don't like skills that have I'm okay where they tweak skills or add like a line or two, but mostly keep the same functionality, switching between PvP and PvE. I don't like it when skills have completely different functionality, because sometimes I might want the effect that was in one format in PvE. Like, I might want the PvP effect in PvE. Like, I cannot make that Signet of Spirits as an energy management skill build in PvE because I don't have that skill in PvE. But Signet of Spirits, like I said, is a ludicrously powerful skill, and it should not be in Channeling Magic. Its effect should be in Communing Magic. It is based off of a special skill that you get in the bonus mission pack when you are playing with Master Togo, when he's doing the Tengu Accords. In that, he gets a 25 energy skill that does this effect. It summons 3 spirits. They might have done a little bit more damage. I don't remember for sure. It's been a while since I've done that. But it's basically this skill at 25 energy, and it's really good there. You should not get that for free. This should be a communing elite, which I guess is actually after, because we're going to be doing it next. It should be an elite in here somewhere. Just give me a new elite that summons these 3 spirits. Like, that is where this skill belongs. The problem with it being in Channeling Magic is there's things in Channeling Magic like Painful Bond that want spirits, and Channeling Magic should be very restricted in the number of spirits it should get. But unfortunately, because of Signet of Spirits, Channeling Magic is like the king of making offensive spirits. That should be what Communing is about, but it's not, because Signet of Spirits is in Channeling Magic, because of the original effect that it had was much more of a channeling effect than it was a communing effect. It was kind of like a Offering of Spirit is. And unfortunately, like, this effect is just, it does not belong in this attribute line, and the skill itself is very strong. It should not be a signet. It should be a binding ritual that costs like 25 energy, and it would still be a phenomenal skill, but it would be less bonkers. So, unfortunately, in some regards, from a design standpoint, I think this is a very poorly designed skill, in that the effect is way too powerful for its cost, and it's in the wrong attribute line. But it's a really, really, really good skill, and like, this is a skill that is partially responsible for me wanting to bring a Ritualist, and I am perfectly happy to run this skill on any, like, at 12 Channeling Magic on any secondary Ritualist. Now, the benefit of doing it on a primary Ritualist, of course, is spawning power will make those spirits more durable, and they can be kind of fragile. But that said, this is easily a 5. This is a 5's 5. This is like, you know, one of those 7s, 10s, whatever, like Antidote Signet level skills. Maybe not quite as easy to slot on as Antidote Signet, but definitely the sort of skill that's like, I want to bring a Ritualist, because it is quite powerful. Keep in mind, Painful Bond does do a lot to add additional damage. So, Signet of Spirits does benefit quite a bit. Like, this does 18 damage, these do 17. Putting them together does a little bit more than doubling the damage, so you do really benefit from Painful Bond. So, anyway, that's enough on Signet of Spirits. I really do wish it was a communing elite binding ritual that cost an appropriate 25 energy. But anyway, here we are. Spirit Boon Strike. So this is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 3 second recharge. Spell. Target foe struck for 56 lightning damage, and all spirits you control within earshot gain 56 health. This is another one of those skills that is kind of quirky. So it's definitely Channeling Magic because of the damage it deals. You're not bringing this for the damage. 56 damage every 3 seconds is never worth it, as far as I'm concerned, by itself. So you definitely want some sort of additional effect. The additional effect of healing all of your spirits, all of your spirits with an earshot, which is, again, a pretty big area of effect. It's pretty easy to do. Is very nice, but this is generally not an effect that I want. The other thing that you'll see with this is a spirit support skill in Channeling Magic, which, again, if it weren't for Signet of Spirits, would not be that great at making spirits, whereas, like, Communing, it would benefit Communing really well. I actually prefer... There's another skill called Spirit Leech Aura that makes your attacking spirits heal themselves. The main benefit of spamming this is it can keep some of the support spirits in, like, for example, Agni, right? Agni deals damage to itself when it makes enemies lose health. Spirit Boon Strike gives it additional time. So for spirits like that lose health when they do their effect, this gives them more uses, and that's really useful in terms of like kind of a raw effect. But this is not a skill that I'd just bring. I would only bring this if I'm specifically trying to boost those spirits up. If I'm trying to keep attacking spirits alive, I prefer something like Spirit Leech Aura, which we will get to much later. So I'm going to give this a 2. The effect is certainly very specific, and this is like one of the few ways that you can actually heal your spirits, but most of the time I don't really care about healing my spirits. So if you want this effect, here it is, but typically that's not an effect that I want. So Spirit Burn. This is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 6 second recharge. Spell. Target foe is struck for 41 lightning damage. If any spirits are within earshot, Spirit Burn causes burning for 4 seconds. So 4 seconds is a little bit on the longer end for burns. Most burns are 2 or 3 seconds. So 4 seconds is a pretty reasonable duration for it. This is definitely never worth using unless you're going to have spirits in earshot, because the burning accounts for most of the damage of this skill. Keep in mind, that's 14 times 4, which is going to be 56 damage by my math. So 56 armor ignoring damage is, as you can tell, bigger than 41 lightning damage most of the time. That said, I don't usually bring this just because, again, my focus is going to be on the Signet of Spirits build that has some support from Restoration Magic and is using Essence Strike to manage its energy, or Spirit Siphon to manage its energy. So I'm not the biggest fan of Spirit Burn. I'm going to give it a 3. I think it's as far as the damaging spells go, this one's okay. The lack of area of effect is kind of awkward on it, but I'm okay with this skill, but I definitely would never use it without spirits around. Again, that's easy enough to do in Ritualist, but it's important to keep that in mind. Okay, Spirit Rift. 10 energy, 2 second cast time, 5 second recharge. Spell. Open a Spirit Rift at target foe's location. After 3 seconds, all adjacent foes are struck for 105 lightning damage and suffer from cracked armor for 16 seconds. So the cracked armor is nice. This does do good damage. It has a really cool effect as it like has this lightning things going up to it and this ball rising and then the damage goes off. This is an extremely awkward to use spell. So enemies can easily be out of the area by the time it goes off. I'm going to give this guy a 3. The damage is there. The area of effect is really nice. The recharge being low is nice. It's just kind of clunky to use. I will say, however, from a design standpoint, I actually really like this as a skill for enemies to use, because it's one of those skills that allows the player to be able to have situational awareness. This is very different from something like a firestorm where the damage starts off right away. And you can recognize that a firestorm is happening and run out of it. You can see the damage happening on you and run out of it, things like that. Spirit Rift doesn't do any damage until those 3 seconds happen. And so you can see the effect of it happening and say, oh, I need to get out of this spot and run out of that area. And from a design standpoint, for things for the players to play against, this spell is really cool because it does do something that says, hey, if you are paying attention, you can mitigate the damage that you're taking. And I really like that design, and I like what is doing as a result. The major thing is like using this is kind of clunky and awkward, and so this is not a spell that I typically bring with me, but it's cool, and it does do good damage when it hits, and it is area of effect, which is nice. But I certainly like the spell much more in terms of like, I think this is really interesting to make as a designer, as a skill to have for enemies to use against the player, for them to be able to benefit from situational awareness and getting out of the way and all that sort of stuff. So I like that angle of it a little bit more than actually using it. That brings us to Spirit Siphon. Spirit Siphon is 5 energy, quarter second activation time, 3 second recharge. Spell. Target spirit closest to you loses all energy. You gain 43% of that energy. I'm not actually sure off the top of my head how much energy spirits have. I think it's probably the default 20, in which case this is gaining you... I don't know. I feel like when I use this, I actually gain a good amount of energy from it. You know what we can do is I can just whack this on my bar. We can take, you know, a couple seconds to step outside and just make a spirit, see how much energy I get off of it. I'm not sure if it's affected by level or not. That's something else that I can test, because this empowerment is level 11. So if I make empowerment, and then I use Spirit Siphon, I just got 13 energy. It lost 31 energy. So that's actually pretty good. If I make this pain is only level 5. Okay, so spirits have 31 energy, it seems, for some reason. And so I get 13 energy off of using that skill. Now, this is a very interesting spell in that it, like, you really only want to have one member of your party having Spirit Siphon at a time, because I don't know if you noticed there, but it uses a separate resource of spirits. So I like this for the energy gain, and that's quite strong. 13 energy back from the 5 energy used is a net of 8. So this is pretty reasonable. It recharges pretty quick. It plays really well with Signal of Spirits, which makes a lot of spirits. But those spirits, yes, they're going to regenerate their energy, but it's going to take them time to regenerate their energy. And let's just say that the amount of time it takes them to regenerate their energy means that you're not really going to be able to use the same spirit twice very easily. And so the fact that this kind of feeds off of a very definite pool means that you don't really want Spirit Siphon on more than one character. That one character can use this to get pretty reliable energy if you are creating enough spirits, and maybe you want it to be your ritualist, maybe you want it to be your monk. I don't really care. But the big issue that you're going to run into is when multiple people are doing this, they're going to quickly drain all of the spirits, and then this skill will quickly cost you 5 energy to return you 1 if you're lucky. And that is not very good. So I like this reasonably well, and I'm going to give it a 4 because I do think it's fairly strong energy management if you're on the Signal of Spirits type build, but it does have that giant asterisk caveat of like only one person should be using the skill at a time, because trying to have multiple characters use it at once does tend to run into that parasitic problem that I was mentioning of like we're all trying to drain from the same resource, and now that resource is dry and this skill doesn't do anything. So I really like the design of this, by the way, just because of that standpoint. Like, this is an energy management skill that plays really differently than any other energy management skill. It can have a really low recharge of only 3 seconds because it's drawing resources from something else entirely, and it's not just creating energy out of the aether, right? You have to, like, something like Offering of Spirit, it just gives you 15 energy. Woo. Spirit Siphon, on the other hand, is like, I'm getting this energy from a spirit, from a thing that's there, and you can't double dip very effectively, and so it's a very limited number of uses, and it's playing around in that space really interestingly. And to me, that's a really interesting creative use of this sort of skill. I kind of actually wish that there had been more skills that used spirits' energy, so that way you could have that as a space that you're playing around in more, because I think that's really interesting and really cool. But I think Spirit Siphon is the only skill that does that. But having that sort of pool, a secondary pool like that, is really interesting to me, and I like that design space. So I kind of wish they'd explored it a little bit more, because it's a really interesting one to me. Or at least it seems really interesting. I don't know if it's something where if you played with enough of those skills where it'd be like, nah, this doesn't actually play out that well, but I don't know. It seems like an interesting concept, at least. Splinter Weapon. 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 5 second recharge, weapon spell. For 20 seconds, target ally has a splinter weapon. That ally's next 4 attacks deal 41 damage to up to 4 adjacent foes. So, basically the way that this works is you hit somebody, and then up to 4 foes adjacent to that target get hit for 41 armor ignoring damage. This is... Now, typically I have this at 11 channeling power, in which case it's 38 damage. But this is extremely powerful at tearing through groups of enemies. Like, especially with attacks that can hit multiple foes, like a Scythe's normal attack, or a whirlwind attack, or Cyclone Axe, or something like that. There's a number of options for skills that hit in an area of effect for attacking. This works super well with like Volley and Barrage, for example, the ranger skills, or even incendiary arrows. So this is an incredibly powerful area of effect tool. Very cheap, very low recharge. It is an extremely good skill. So this is another 5. This is another reason to bring a Channeling Ritualist, in my opinion. It goes really nicely on that Signal of Spirits build. The amount of damage that you can get out of this is just very high. So this is a highly recommended skill. And one that probably is a little too good, honestly. Maybe be the next 1 or 2 attacks, not the next 4. But, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. So it's a very powerful skill, and an incredibly powerful tool for the Ritualist to bring along to be able to increase your party's damage. And skills like this that push out things like Spirit Rift, generally speaking, because this deals so much armor-ignoring damage so reliably that something like Spirit Rift is not worth bringing. And it should be noted that, yes, the up to 4 adjacent foes cap is a cap, but the number of times that you'd be able to hit more than that is actually kind of low. So, but yeah, this can do just staggering amounts of damage. So, very, very good skill. Wailing Weapon. So, Wailing Weapon is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 25 second recharge. Is a weapon spell. For 8 seconds, target ally has a Wailing Weapon. Whenever the Wailing Weapon strikes an attacking foe, that foe is interrupted. I don't really know when I would want this. Like, so it's not as good as Warmonger's Weapon. We'll talk about Warmonger's Weapon in a moment, but interrupting attacking foes is certainly not unuseful, but you have to be hitting an attack cadence that stops everything that they do. You definitely want to use this on somebody using a faster weapon like an axe or a sword or daggers. This could be really hilarious if you're using this on a Locust Fury dagger build, where it's just like, now you're never attacking. It can mitigate a little bit of damage, but honestly, like, the biggest reason why you'd want to interrupt attacking is not to interrupt attacking for mitigating damage, although that's useful. It would be mostly to interrupt attack skills, and that tends to be kind of finicky and hard to do. So I don't see a reason why I'd want to bring this, if I'm being honest. I would rather inflict blind if I'm wanting to stop attack skills. This is just a very narrow application. So while it's kind of an interesting design idea, in practice, it just doesn't do very much. I think I'm going to give it a 1. Because I'm honestly not sure when I'd want this effect. Like, basically, the main issue here, to kind of clarify my thinking a little bit, is blind is going to mitigate damage more usefully than stopping attacking is. So I would much, much, much rather be inflicting blind on enemies than allowing an ally to interrupt their attacking, just because that's not terribly useful most of the time. So I'm not particularly interested in Wailing Weapon. That brings us to Warmonger's Weapon, which is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 30-second recharge, weapon spell. For 11 seconds, if target ally attacks a foe who is not attacking, that foe is interrupted. This is much more useful, because this will interrupt everything but attack skills, right? This will interrupt spells, this will interrupt rituals, all sorts of stuff. It is noticeably costed more as a result. Excuse me. Keep in mind, spawning power does extend the duration, so 12 spawning power would increase this by 48%, which is going to be roughly 5 seconds for almost a bit over half uptime. So this effect to me is a lot more interesting and a lot more powerful. I generally am not going to be bringing this, but I can absolutely see it being a very valid option of a skill to bring. Particularly, I could see wanting to bring this against elementalist bosses in like Factions On, where they deal increased damage, to be able to try to shut down some of the spells they're using. I do like Dazed more, but the reliable ways of getting Dazed are all like elite skills. So, I mean, there's a Paragon non-elite skill, but we'll get to that down the road. So, in general, Warmonger's Weapon, I can see using it. I'm going to give this a 3. I feel like it's actually relatively powerful, but it's just not a skill I typically consider or use or whatever, so... certainly, Splinter Weapon to kill groups of enemies is something I favor, but I also only really like to bring one weapon spell at a time because they don't stack very well. I don't know how well the AI manages some of that, but yeah, anyway. Weapon of Aggression. This is 10 energy, quarter second activation time, 10-second recharge, weapon spell. For 13 seconds, you attack 25% faster. Emphasis on you. Technically, you could use this on like a secondary assassin to get increased attack speed. If I'm being honest, I would prefer to use Flurry, probably for increased attack speed on an assassin, because that is less, like, it's about the same amount of energy. 5 energy every 5 seconds as opposed to 10 energy every 10 seconds. But that's a stance and doesn't have the activation time. The main time that I consider using this is with Spirit Strength. But the thing is, this only applies to you. So, like, you can use it secondary. Where is it? That's 12, so... Okay, so I could see going into, like, 8 channeling to be able to get Weapon of Aggression, maybe, but that seems a really suspect way of getting an increased attack speed skill. So... Yeah, I'm going to give this a 2. I think that there are some situations where it can be used, but the fact that it only applies to you makes it a lot less appealing. The other profession that I could see actually making a reasonable use of it and being quite happy about that is... I could see Paragon doing that. So I could see using this with, like, if I'm doing, for some reason, like a Signet of Spirits Paragon or something like that, I could see using Weapon of Aggression to increase the attack speed there. Or even with just, like, Stunning Strike or something like that. Because Paragon's increased attack speed skills are also a little finicky. Although, and their energy is a little bit, I don't know. Like, this is really awkward because I feel like Flurry is a very valid choice if you're going for a secondary profession. It doesn't have any attribute requirement. So I feel like the main time where I'd consider using this is with a Spirit Strength build, where I want to apply a weapon skill to myself because that's what makes Spirit Strength work. We'll talk about it when we get to communing, I believe. No, it's spawning power. So Spirit Strength right here, it's an enchantment that makes your attacks deal more damage while you're under the effects of a weapon spell. So Weapon of Aggression works really, really nicely for that sort of build. I don't really see myself using it outside of that. Again, you can only cast it on yourself. If you could cast it on other allies, it would be a lot more interesting. And I would actually consider bringing it to, like, increase the attack speed of anyone. like an assassin or paragon or whatever, if you could use this on any ally. The only your self-restriction is unfortunately way too tight for something like this. And so I would much prefer this skill at like a 1 second cast time on any ally or something like that. And I feel like it would be fine. As it is, it's kind of narrow. Weapon of Fury. Weapon of Fury is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 8 second recharge. Has an incredibly rad icon. Look at that lightsaber. That's such a sweet icon. We're not rating skills on the icons. If we were, Symbol of Wrath would get a much higher score. But anyway, Weapon of Fury is an elite weapon spell. For 17 seconds, target ally gains 41% more adrenaline and 1 energy whenever that ally successfully hits with an attack. So, like, here's the thing. Yes, this kind of supercharges an ally. You could technically use this on, like, a warrior and apply this to yourself, or like a dervish or whatever, to be able to have some energy management for some of the more expensive skills, but also to gain a bunch more adrenaline. Gaining 41% more adrenaline will really allow you to charge stuff up a lot more quickly. That's really, really nice. But here's our issue. We only can have one weapon spell on us at a time. And if I'm going to pick between Weapon of Fury and Splinter Weapon, I'm going to pick Splinter Weapon, because this kills enemies dead. This kills groups of enemies very quickly. This just makes me more efficient as an attacker. This is a strong effect, but, like... man, again, if we're grading on icons, this would get a good score, because the icon is so sweet. But I generally just don't want this effect enough to warrant making it my elite. Like, this is competing on 2 territories, right? It's competing for my elite slot in an attribute line that has Signet of Spirits, so that's already a big problem. And it's competing for weapon skill that I want to be passing around in an attribute line with Splinter Weapon. So it's got, like, 2 knocks against it of, like, there's an elite that I prefer in this attribute line, and there's a weapon skill I prefer in this attribute line. It just doesn't quite get there. I'm torn between giving this like a 2 and a 3. A 3 just because I like the skill because of how sweet the skill icon is. I think the biggest thing with this is it supercharges the charge rate of adrenaline skills, which is actually really good. The energy is nice. The fact that you can, like, cast this on your monks and stuff to allow them to be able to gain energy from auto-attacking is actually really useful. So that's a worthwhile consideration. I'm going to give this a 3. I feel like this deserves a 3 just because of the fact that it can also be energy management for your casters as well as improving your physical attackers. That's an important aspect of it to not overlook. So the fact that I can throw this on a monk and they can just wand things to gain energy, that is actually pretty sweet. So I think it probably gets a 3 for me from that standpoint. If it was only useful on attackers, I don't think I would give it. I think I'd probably give it a 2, but the fact that I can be like, hey, I want to give my monk this so that way they can gain energy, that gives it a better score for me. Wielder's Strike. Like, again, that's not my preferred way of doing it. I rather use Blood Ritual, but Weapon of Fury does do that. So anyway, Wielder's Strike, 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 6 second recharge. Spell, target foe struck for 41 lightning damage. If you are under the effects of a weapon spell, you deal an additional 34 lightning damage for a total of 75. Oh, that's not very good. Which is the problem. This just doesn't do enough for what it's doing. It's single target, all that sort of stuff. I'm gonna give this a 2. It does do things. I don't think it's quite bad enough at doing things to get a lower score. But I don't know when I want to use this. The recharge is a little bit long. I'd prefer like a 4-second recharge, but 6 seconds is not bad. It's just the damage. Again, this is a problem. Damage is a little bit lower than I want, and you have to jump through hoops to make it work. So, yeah, I'm not a big fan of how Wielder's Strike. Like, I appreciate things that are playing in the space of let's reward you for doing the thing, but Wielder Strike is just not rewarding me enough. It's not quite doing enough. If it was 41 additional lightning damage for being under the effects of a weapon spell, I would like it better, but I still wouldn't like it much. So I would also actually like this more if it was target foe is struck for 41 lightning damage, and if they are under the effects of a weapon spell, you deal an additional, I don't know, like 80 damage or something, some large amount. Then that becomes more interesting and compelling because that is specifically a skill to punish the opponent for using weapon spells, which is the sort of thing that needs to exist in the game. I don't know that there are any skills that actually punish for using weapon skills, but the fact that they can't be removed means that you need to have some sort of counter something to them. Like, I think all skills should have some kind of counterplay, whether it's using skills that prevent you from being interrupted to counter interruption, or interrupting things that otherwise are powerful. Weapon spells can be interrupted, but I would like to see additional counterplay, and Wielder Strike could have been rearranged to be that skill. Instead, it's just kind of in the rewarding you for doing the thing, and that's less compelling to me. So from a design standpoint, I really wish that this was like, let's punish the opponent for being under the effects of weapon spells. I wish that sort of skill existed, but I don't think it does. And unfortunately, Wielder Strike is just not an effect that I am terribly interested in most of the time. That's not what I'm doing with a Ritualist. Like, this is what it comes down to, is like, what I'm doing with a Ritualist most of the time is using spirits to support my party or deal damage to enemies, or I'm using some sort of like support weapon spells or going into some of the restoration magic for support and things like that. If I'm wanting direct target damage, I'm going to go air magic before I'm going to go Ritualist, because air magic has armor penetration on its lightning damage, and channeling does not, unless I'm bringing specifically like glaive or stuff like that. So that's just kind of how all that stuff kind of comes together. So I would have liked to see a skill that specifically punishes the use of weapon skills rather than reward you for using weapon spells on yourself, but it is what it is. So anyway, that's going to go ahead and wrap up stuff for Channeling Magic. Next time I'll talk about Communing, which has not got any sort of thing after it. It's just Communing. So until then, everyone, take care. Goodbye.